Lieutenant Steve Leland had stopped believing in luck sometime during the first day. By the third, luck had become a bad joke told by a dead radio. He stood in the broken ribs of outpost Helios, what used to be concrete walls and antenna towers. Now twisted into blackened scaffolds, smoke crawled over the rubble in lazy coils. The sky above Eridan never fully turned blue. It was always the color of old umber, as if the planet itself had been poured into a bottle and sealed. 3 days of non-stop drone strikes had stripped the place down to a graveyard of scorched metal and scattered bones. His squad, his friends, his entire garrison gone. Only him. Steve thumbed the cracked transmitter on his wrist. The tiny screen flickered with a weak heartbeat of power, then dimmed again. Command. "This is Lieutenant Leland," he said, forcing his voice into the steady cadence he'd been trained to wear like armor. "Outpost Helios is lost. Repeat, Helios is lost. All personnel, Kier. This officer only. Requesting immediate extraction." Static answered. Not even the pity of a click. He tried again, then again, and got the same empty snowstorm. The relay tower had probably died in the last bombardment. Or the drones had jammed everything for the fun of it. Fantastic. He muttered and checked his rifle. Charge. 22%. 22% wasn't a plan. It was an expiration date. A sharp ping trembled through the motion sensor on his belt. Steve froze, pain flaring from his side, where an energy bolt had kissed him hours ago. The sensor didn't show the chaotic scuttling of standard defenders. These signatures moved like soldiers, purposeful, coordinated. Steve slid behind a fallen slab of wall and raised his rifle, breath shallow. If the drones had evolved again, if they'd learned how to stalk a craft slipped down through the amber haze, silent as a knife, sleek, silver, to clean for anything built on Eridan. It settled beyond the ruined perimeter, kicking up dust in a slow halo. Steve recognized the design immediately. Zillar, technically allies on paper, at a distance. With plenty of clauses, in reality, the Zillar treated humans the way a proud species treated a noisy new neighbor, with irritation and thinly disguised contempt. The ship's ramp opened. 6 figures descended, blue-skinned and tall, armor hugging them like liquid plating. 5 fanned out, rifles angled outward. The 6th walked in the middle as if the world was supposed to make room. Even from far off, Steve could tell she was. The commander. Well, he whispered. The cavalry. 3 days late. He stepped out slowly. Hands lifted just enough to show he wasn't aiming while keeping the rifle close enough to matter. The Zillar squad halted, weapons tracking him in perfect unison. "Identify yourself," the commander called. Her standard English had a strange music to it, clipped and elegant, as if she resented each human syllable. "Lieutenant Steve Leland, Terran Defense Force." He swallowed the copper taste in his mouth. Last survivor of outpost Helios. She approached with measured contempt, gaze sweeping over him like an inspection of faulty equipment. Up close, she was striking in a way that made Steve briefly forget he was bleeding sharp cheekbones. Luminous eyes, hair the color of moonlit steel braided tight against her skull. Her insignia marked her high ranking. Commander Kiora. She said, "Zillar Expeditionary Force. We received your distress call 3 cycles ago." Her eyes narrowed. "It appears we wasted our time." Steve felt something tight in his jaw. "With respect, Commander, your response time could use work. We held against reprogrammed defenders for 3 days, and yet," she replied, expression unchanged, "you stand alone." One of her soldiers spoke in rapid clicks and consonants in their native tongue. Kiora's gaze hardened. "Your defense grid is still partially alive," she said. "It's interfering with our scanners." "It's compromised," Steve answered. "Those drones were ours until something rewrote them." Kiora turned sharply to her squad and issued orders. To took the perimeter. One moved toward the rubble that used to be the command center. Then, almost as an afterthought, she looked at Steve again. "You are wounded, not concern. Diagnosis. I'll manage." Her eyes lingered on his torn uniform and the dried blood at his temple. Humans are not known for resilience. Steve let a thin smile appear. "You'd be surprised what we can endure." "I doubt it," she said, like the idea offended her. A high, needle-thin whine cut through the air. Steve's instincts screamed. He lunged toward Kiora, shouting, "Down!" 5 metallic darts flashed from the ruins and struck her from behind, wedging into the seams of her armor. Kiora staggered, a sharp cry tearing from her throat. "Commander!" one of her soldiers shouted. Starting forward, Steve was already beside her, eyes locking onto the darts. His stomach dropped as recognition hit. "Proximity mines," he said, "modified from our security kits." Kiora's eyes widened with fury and realization. "Get away from me, human. They'll blow in under a minute," Steve snapped. "Your armor stopped full deployment, but they'll still shred you." "My warriors," she began, jaw clenched tight. "No time. And if they pull wrong, the mines trip instantly." He reached for the first dart. "I know the release sequence." "How?" she hissed, pain twitching across her face. "I helped install the system." He positioned his hands carefully. "This will hurt." "Stop," she demanded, voice shaking with rage. "Leave them. Do not touch me." But Steve's hands were steady. He yanked the first dart free in a precise arc. Then the second. Then the third, each removal a controlled motion that prevented the trigger from sensing tampering. Kiora's protests broke into strained gasps as pain spiked and faded. He hurled all 5 darts across the clearing as far as his injured body allowed. A heartbeat later, the devices detonated small, sharp bursts that sent dirt and shrapnel raining down. Kiora stared at him, breathing hard, her eyes no longer purely contemptuous, confused now, and something closer to unsettled. "Why?" she asked, as if the question offended her. Steve shrugged, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "Because I can. Because that's what we do. We save lives when we still have a choice." Her mouth tightened. "Even mine. Even yours." The ground vibrated with a distant roar. Steve turned his head toward the horizon. Dark shapes crested a ridge many more than before. "They're coming back," he said. "And it's a lot." Kiora pulled herself upright. refusing his offered support despite the tremble in her posture. "We retreat to our ship. Your ship's sitting in open ground," Steve shot back. "The drones will go for engines first." Kiara's gaze flicked toward the approaching swarm. She didn't like following a human's lead, but the situation didn't care about pride. Alternative, she demanded. "A maintenance bunker," Steve said, pointing east. "Reinforced walls. Independent power. We can hold long enough to figure out who's puppeting our grid." A Zillar soldier returned, clicking urgently. Kiara translated with visible irritation. "Communications are jammed. No reinforcements are coming." Steve gave a humorless laugh. "Welcome to Helios." They ran, the first drone Terran make. Guardian class swept overhead and opened weapon ports. Steve fired, conserving energy, his rifle's low charge stinging his conscience. Zillar shots answered in synchronized beams, clean and devastating. The Guardian burst into sparks. "Impressive," Steve admitted, ducking under a scorched beam. Kiara's tone sharpened. "Keep moving." They reached the bunker door as a wave of drones surged over the ridge like a metallic tide. Steve punched an access code by memory. The door groaned open. They spilled inside as blasts carved molten scars across the entryway. The bunker sealed with a heavy thud. Emergency lights painted everything red. The interior was narrow, made for droids and technicians, not 6 armed warriors. Kiara looked around like the walls themselves insulted her. "This is your plan," she said. A box with 3 feet of composite and an isolated power cell," Steve replied. "Already moving to the terminal and access to what's left of the defense grid." The schematics flickered to life. Broken lines, dead nodes, but enough remained to trace patterns. Kiara leaned close, studying the display. "Your technology is adequate." Steve almost smiled. For her, that was practically a compliment. The bunker shuddered as drones hammered outside. Steve scanned data feeds and found it a signal threaded through the drone commands like a parasite. Not Terran encryption, not Zillar. Kiara's finger tapped an anomaly. That pattern. "I've seen it." Steve looked up sharply. "Where?" "Near the Cygnus void," she said, voice lowering. "We lost an entire battle group investigating a derelict station. The crew changed. Their minds rewired into processing units." A chill crawled up Steve's spine. "And you stopped it, how?" Kiara's face went hard. "Quarantine, elimination, your own people. The many outweigh the few," she said. But her eyes flickered just once with something like old regret. Steve didn't have time to argue philosophy. The bunker shook again. A warning light flashed. Structural integrity 87%. 81%. "We can't sit here," Steve said. "We take the fight to whatever's transmitting that signal." Kiara slammed her fist on the console. "We strike. Direct assault. My warriors are trained to crush threats." Steve shook his head. "And the drones adapt. We tried direct pushes. 47 dead in the first day. Another impact. Integrity. 72%. Silence filled the bunker except the distant, grinding attempt of drones to breach. Finally, Kiara exhaled through her nose. "Your alternative. a maintenance tunnel under the hub. Steve said, pulling up a map. We bypassed the perimeter, hit the control center from below. Kiara's lip curled. Tunnels. Coward tactics. And how many Zillar survive pride? Steve snapped back. We're not debating honor. We're buying minutes. Before she could reply, the ceiling buckled. A drone dropped through the breach and fired immediately. A Zillar soldier took a hit in the shoulder and crashed to the floor. Steve fired 3 shots at its optic. To pinged. Uselessly, the third blinded it. Now, he shouted. Kiara moved like a blade. She vaulted onto the drone's back, ignited an energy knife, and drove it into a junction seam. The machine convulsed and collapsed in a shower of sparks. For 1 beat. They stood in the aftermath breathing hard, dust drifting in red light. Kiara knelt beside her wounded soldier. He will live. And we're leaving, Steve said, eyeing the breach. Where one fits, more follow. Kiara met his gaze. Something had shifted. Not softness, she wasn't suddenly gentle, but recognition, grudging and real. Your tunnel. She conceded. But once we reach the core, we strike fast. They split. Her warriors would draw drones away topside. Kiara would go with Steve. Below, to ensure success, she claimed, though Steve saw the cost of admitting she needed him. In the cramped tunnel, shoulders brushing against metal and stone, their earlier hostility bled into something tense and unfamiliar. When Steve teased her height, she stiffened. I am 5'11", she said, almost offended. You measured in human units, Steve noted. A faint violet tinge rose on her blue cheeks. Zillar blush. He realized, surprised. Further in, the tunnel changed. Manufactured walls gave way to smooth stone that shouldn't have been there. Carvings glowed faintly. Ancient and alien. This isn't in the schematics, Steve murmured. It resembles Cygnus writing. Kiara said, voice tight. The same. Presence. The same. Hunger. A tremor rolled through the ground. Then another, stronger. A crack split the floor, spilling blue light like an open vein. They ran. The passage spilled into a vast underground chamber. At its heart stood an impossible structure, columns of living metal pulsing with energy. And in the center a hovering orb threaded with tendrils of light that reached into the rock-like roots. A nexus, Kiara breathed, or slipping through. Her discipline, a control heart. A drone emerged different from Terran mortals. Its surface rippled like liquid, motion unsettlingly organic. It connected to the orb, and a holographic map flared open, marking human and Zillar settlements alike as targets. It's not just Helios, Steve whispered. It's planning to wipe the planet. An ancient defense system, Kiara said, still active. And it sees us as intruders. Steve's mind seized on a detailed conduits running upward, tied into Helios' power grid. It's feeding on our supply, dependent on it. Kiara stared, then cut the feed. Not cut, Steve said. Thinking faster, overload. He pulled a dart from his pouch, one he'd pocketed after saving her. These minds carry an impulse. If I reprogram them to sync, place them around the orb, we might force a surge that fries the nexus. Kiara's eyes narrowed. You kept them? Military habit, Steve said, then softened. I'll need 5 minutes. And you need a distraction, she replied, understanding. So you want me to be bait? I want you to be the warrior you keep claiming to be. A slow, dangerous smile curved her mouth. Clever, human, then, with the chamber humming around them, she touched his face briefly, gentle, startlingly intimate, and kissed him. It was fierce and quick, like a promise carved into stone. For luck, she said, a flicker of mischief in her eyes. I am told humans enjoy rituals before battle. Before Steve could form a response, she was gone, charging into open space, shouting insults at ancient machines, drawing the liquid drones after her like a comet trail of rage. Steve forced focus back into his hands. He rewired detonators, tuned frequencies, calibrated timing. The work demanded precision he barely had left. A cry of pain echoed. His head snapped up, but he didn't move. 5 minutes, he whispered. Hold, Kiora. Just hold. He placed the final dart at the orb's base. A drone hovered nearby, studying him like an insect pinned under glass. Then it turned toward Kiora's gunfire. That moment saved him. Now, Kiora shouted, wounded, but unbroken, pinned behind a column with blue blood streaking her arm. Detonate. Steve triggered the sequence. All 5 darts pulsed in unison. The chamber filled with a rising whine as electromagnetic energy built into a scream. The drones froze mid-motion, their liquid skins turning rigid. Run, Steve yelled, sprinting toward Kiora. He grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the tunnel as the orb fractured, spitting light across the chamber. The explosion hit like the wrath of a god. Stone collapsed, metal screamed. They were thrown into darkness. When the shaking stopped, they lay in a pocket of space, half buried but alive. Steve's armor lights cast weak illumination. Dust floated like snow. You alive? He asked. Voice raw. I will live, Kiora said, echoing his earlier words. Because you refuse to listen. He laughed once, quietly, because the alternative was crying. Their faces were inches apart. The adrenaline, the survival, the strange respect forged in fire. It cracked the last of their walls. In the dark, the universe felt very small, and for a short while they clung to each other as if closeness could keep death away. Then the rubble shifted. Light speared through as rescue teams dug them out. Human and Zillar both. Colonel Harrin, Steve's commander, stared down with a thundercloud expression, while High Commander Telvos of the Zillar watched with cold calculation. On the surface, Helios had become a divided camp to fleets, to command zones, 2 sets of rules. Debriefings followed, arguments, accusations thinly veiled as protocol. Telvos insisted on salvage rights. Harrin demanded joint control. Both pretended the real danger was politics, not whatever had built the Nexus. Then long-range sensors caught an unidentified vessel sliding toward Eridan, silent, immense. Not responding, it sent a signal before we destroyed it, Steve said, dread settling in his stomach. A beacon. Panic surged through both command staffs. Intercept plans began. Weapons primed. Kiora found Steve in the chaos, eyes bright with a decision she hadn't asked permission to make. The transmission was not an attack code, she said. It was recognition. You think whoever's coming isn't hostile? Steve replied. Not by default, she said. But they will defend if threatened, just like the system did. So they did the one thing their leaders couldn't. They trusted each other. They slipped back into the excavated chamber with Kiora's second-in-command covering their tracks. A newly unearthed console still faintly hummed with alien life. This array can transmit, Kiora said, fingers moving with practiced certainty. Advanced species often share a universal foundation. Math. Steve rerouted power from auxiliary conduits, feeding the console. The symbols brightened. The air crackled. Vessel in range. A lookout warned. 12 minutes. And then both command teams stormed in Telvo's barking orders. Harren threatening court-martial. Guns lifted. Voices sharpened. Steve stepped between Kiora and the armed guards. 30 seconds, he said. Let her finish. To his surprise, Harren raised a hand. 30 seconds, the colonel repeated, jaw tight. Make them worth it. Kiora entered the sequence. The console emitted a resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through stone, bone, and history. On the holographic display, the alien vessel slowed. It's responding. Kiora whispered, or threading her voice. Symbols appeared complex, elegant, unmistakably intelligent. It identifies itself, she translated. The builders. They abandoned this defense system millennia ago. It reactivated when we arrived. They want to know who triggered it, and whether we are a threat. Steve glanced at Kiora, then placed his hand over hers. Together, they transmitted a composite message, humans and Zillar working side by side, not as invaders, but as people who had stopped a runaway weapon. The response came fast. The alien vessel stopped entirely, settling into stable orbit. More symbols appeared. They will send a representative, Kiora said, exhaling, to meet those who disabled their system. Around them, tension drained from the chamber. Telvos and Harren exchanged a look that held reluctant acknowledgement. The insubordinate pair had likely prevented a war. Later, on an observation platform beneath Eridan's amber sunset, Steve found Kiora alone. The light warmed her blue skin into something almost human. Not bad, Steve said, leaning beside her. Save a planet. Avoid an interstellar incident. All in a week. Kiora's smile this time was real, full enough to transform her face. Not bad for a human and a Zillar who began with contempt. Steve threaded his fingers with hers on the railing. So what now? She met his gaze, eyes steady. Zillar may take mates from other species, she said, as if discussing mission parameters. Rare, complicated, involves ritual challenges and approvals. Steve huffed a quiet laugh. Sounds like bureaucratic torture. It is, she agreed. But I do not avoid challenges. Steve leaned closer, feeling the strange calm that came after surviving something that should have killed them. Neither do I below them. Helios was rebuilding, still scarred, still divided, but alive. Above them, an ancient civilization was coming to ask questions. And beside him stood the one person who had looked at him like he was fragile and learned the hard way that humans could endure. Kiora squeezed his hand once, firm and certain. Whatever came next: politics, aliens, treaties. Rituals they would face it the only way they'd survived so far, together.